Good morning. My name is Clarence Anthony, the Executive Director of the National League of Cities, and on behalf of the Big Seven, which includes the National Governors Association, the National Conference of State Legislators, the Council of State Governments, the National Association of Counties, the International City-County Managers Association, the Government Finance Officers Association, the National Association of State Budget Officers, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and of course, again, the National League of Cities. I welcome you here today, and thank you all for joining us to discuss a topic of huge importance to state and local governments and its finances. We have a great panel of state and local government experts here today who are going to share with you some insights on how state and local finance work and what impact it has on our nation and nation cities, counties, and state levels, and how it works and how you all do and what we do to partner with the federal government. And most importantly, what impact it has on each level of government. I'm talking about how our members, the nation cities, the counties, and states, and other partners work together to maintain and grow the economy of our nation. We have other state or executive directors and other partners here. I know NASBO as well is here, and we'd like to thank them for joining us as well. This gathering is the first of a series of briefings that we've been developing to increase awareness of the many roles and responsibilities that the state and local governments fulfill in our nation, and how we fit in to this larger federal, state, local partnership that runs our country. And we recognize that, you know, we don't just sit around and wait on the federal government to deal with our issues, but we do need a partner now as well as in the future. I'm not going to talk long because we got great panelists that are going to really dig a little deeper. But our goal here is to have a conversation and have the audience engage with the panel and pose questions so that we really do get some clear understanding and partnership for the future. Our first panelist will be Scott Patterson. He serves as the Executive Director and the Chief Executive Officer of the National Governors Association. NGA is a bipartisan organization of our governors nationally. They speak with a collective voice on a wide range of issues and work to influence the federal government on innovative ideas that can be implemented nationwide. You know, you look at the innovation that is happening at NGA, and Scott is really leading that, pressing public policy challenges, identifying those solutions that help at the state level every day. Scott has a great background working with the FTC, held the role as advisor, attorney, a special assistant. So he brings a lot of information and great background to this panel today, including his 14 years as director of the National Association of State Budget Officers. So it's going to be great hearing from Scott. And then we have Matt Chase, who serves as the executive director of the National Association. By the way, this is Scott. That's Matt. Matt serves as the executive director of the National Association of Counties. He got that job in 2012. Has been an excellent partner. As the chief executive officer, he manages the day-to-day operation of the association of over 3,000 counties, governments in our nation. Previously he served as the executive director of the National Association of Development Organization, which represents local government-based regional development organizations. His background legislatively is just exceptional as he worked at NACo as well as served as the deputy executive director at NACo. So welcome, Matt. And finally, we'll have Tim Firestein, currently serves as the Chief Administrative Officer for Montgomery County. He has worked in the public sector for over 28 years. As I read, you started as a budget analyst and then just moved your way all the way up to the top.
Actually, 37 years.
37 years, all right.
Who's counting?
I know, man. I was about to say I was in high school, but anyway, we won't go there. But you really started in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, and really moved up to serve in the Office of Management and Budget for the last 12 years and becoming the Director of Finance in 1991. In 2006, he was appointed as Chief Administrative Officer of the county. So with that, I want to transition to the panel, but one thing you'll hear the panel talk about today, but cannot be overstated, is the imperative that for cities, counties, and states, that maintaining tax-exempt municipal bond status is essential to all levels of government, especially the three that you're going to hear from today. Municipal and state bonds are the primary way that state and local governments finance all of our infrastructure for everyday life for our citizens that live in our communities, whether it's hospitals, water treatment plants, whether it's facilities and roads. That is the tool that we use to make sure that those projects come to fruition. Over 42,000 state and local governments finance critical issues using tax-exempt municipal bonds. So let me go right into asking Scott to come up to talk to us today and to share his view of the budget process and the impact of the federal and state partnership.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. I really appreciate being here, and do want to tell folks, if you're hungry, keep getting up and eating bagels. But the one thing I want to kind of get across is so important, because it's easily forgotten, and there's so much going on right now with a presidential transition and new folks in the Congress, and it's interesting and exciting and lots going on. But the bottom line is states and locals can really make a difference in implementing the policies that folks here at the federal level want. And so it's important not to forget that part. There's another thing I really want to emphasize, because this is often forgotten. And the bottom line is states and local governments are very different than the federal government in that they don't control a currency like the feds do. They don't control interest rates. There are so many things that state and local governments don't have tools and powers. And so, for the most part, when they are budgeting and spending money or raising revenue, it's a zero-sum game type atmosphere. They cannot go on the markets and borrow a lot. They borrow, as Clarence mentioned, muni bonds are really important for building infrastructure, but for the most part, they can't go run large deficits as the federal government does. So there's not a lot of flexibility in the budget, and that really has to be remembered, I think, by everyone, because if you don't realize that, certain decisions are going to be made that don't understand there's a lack of financial flexibility at the state and the local government level. So the first slide, I decided to use a Munch painting to kind of illustrate kind of a contemplative person, in that there's a lot of uncertainty, but I don't really mean the political uncertainty or the uncertainty about who's going to be the next cabinet pick. It's broader than that. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, economically, fiscally, internationally, and again, that has an impact too that we can't forget. The next slide, I want to talk about the breakdown. I think a lot of people in this room know this, but we have 8 new governors at the state level. The North Carolina race has not yet been decided. And in 2017, there will actually be 33 Republicans, 15 Democrats in terms of governors, 26 Republican-controlled states, meaning they have the legislature and the governor, and 6 Democratic-controlled states. I do want to say, I'm old enough now that I can say this. During my career, I always caution people this. These numbers flip back and forth. And so there'll be a time in a few years the Dems will be on top, and it's going to flip back and forth. I started my career, it was something like 35 Democratic governors and 40 states controlled by Democrats. I mean, it just goes back and forth. The other thing is that the vice president is a governor, the vice president-elect, and I think that's very helpful for us to bring that perspective from the state level. And of course, the Democratic vice presidential nominee had been a governor too. So the next slide, at the National Governors Association, what are kind of the key issues that are being focused on? There's certainly the implementation of the education changes under ESSA that was passed last year. But right now, there's a big issue of how to handle health, given that there's going to be the talk of fairly major changes or repeal of the ACA. That's going to have an impact on states and locals and health care. And we would like to be part, I know governors and states, and I know the locals too, want to be part of how does that happen so that we can get the results that everybody wants, which is, frankly, better healthcare outcomes at lower cost. We also are big on cybersecurity. That's a hot issue for the states right now. Civic engagement, we were actually a sponsor of the 2016 presidential debates, getting folks really aware of what's going on kind of in the civic sphere. I know, it's kind of funny. I was listening to a rock station this morning as I came in, and when I walked in, I thought, you know what? I haven't heard any news, and the problem with that was I thought there are so many people that do that. As part of my job, I'm going to hear that certain cabinet picks have been named and so forth. But I thought, wow, we really want people more engaged civically. The other thing is bipartisanship really still has a role in driving how certain policies come out. Because again, results are what matter. The next slide, what are the key issues for states? One of them obviously is health care. And I can't emphasize enough, I talked at the beginning about how states are impacted by so many things, and local government too, but they don't have the same tools that a federal national government does in terms of interest rates, currency, and so forth. So they really are hampered. So one of the things that we want to emphasize is states want to be part of this process because they will be impacted from a budget and fiscal standpoint as to what changes happen at the healthcare arena. One exciting thing, though, is in the healthcare area, states are doing so many exciting, innovative things because, frankly, they have to. I mentioned the budget situation for them is a zero-sum game. As a result, they really, really worry about every dime. So they've done some really exciting things in healthcare that I think the federal government can really look at and think about how can we encourage that continued innovation, that creativity. One of the things, for example, is they're trying to figure out how do you get people out of the emergency room. For example, Minnesota found that there were a lot of elderly who were coming to the emergency room on a regular basis. And it was costing hundreds of millions of dollars. And they found that if they just had the ambulance drivers just give a one sentence about what was going on in the home, it made a huge difference. And they were finding that often those who regularly went to the emergency room were hoarders, or they had some other issue in their home, they were falling a lot. And they went in, they figured that, they fixed that problem that was very cheap to fix to decrease the amount of people in emergency rooms. There are all kinds of innovative things that increase the quality of the healthcare outcome, but cost less. Economic development, obviously huge for states, governors in particular. In fact, I think there were 3 or 4 governors this month in China trying to increase trade and jobs and development and exports. And so just growing the jobs in their states is absolutely critical for governors. Taxes, of course, are always an issue. The impact of revenue changes. Where do you do tax cuts? Do you target them? How much do you have enough play and flexibility to do cuts? And also the tax system and any changes at the federal level do impact the state level. That's often overlooked too, that something can be done at the federal level, and I hear that talked about a lot. You know, there'll be all kinds of discussion here in these buildings here on Capitol Hill, and yet sometimes it's forgotten. Wait, you do something, you could affect the states, which actually ultimately affects the constituents of the senators and the House members. So that's something to keep in mind. The next slide. What's the economic outlook for the states at this snapshot in time? We continue, and we've had modest growth, not great growth, not terrible growth or downturn, but it's been very modest. The total state spending, and again, that's total, it actually decreased in the last fiscal year. That's the National Association of State Budget Officers. I want to mention John Hicks here. If you ever need state budget information, go to NASBO. Great place to get all the data and information you need. Revenue growth is expected to remain slow this fiscal year. And then, again, I think I go back to that first slide of that painting. Uncertainty is the biggest issue that is facing states both economically and fiscally. And I really want to emphasize that that's why there's caution, that's why there's concern among governors and other officials at the state level. In the next slide, I can't emphasize this enough. Medicaid is absolutely key to state budgets. And here's why. That dashed line is roughly the expectation of the year-over-year revenue growth that states are expected to receive. But if you look at one of the CMS forecasts, which I think is a fairly cautious forecast, we expect some fairly continued large Medicaid growth that's going to be higher than the amount of money coming into the states. So again, it's a zero-sum game, and states are going to need to be able to deal with the fact that not enough money is coming in that covers the Medicaid growth. And as John with NASBO has discussed with me and pointed out well, one of the problems is that we're counter-cyclical at the state level because of what I mentioned earlier. We don't have control over our currency. We can't go on the markets and do deficit spending. We don't control interest rates at the state level, obviously. So we don't have extra flexibility to deal with a downturn. We just have to cut or raise taxes. And so again, it's a zero-sum game, and anything that happens in Medicaid really doesn't impact the states. What states want, obviously, is flexibility to continue the innovation that they can do so that they can get to the lower costs, as I mentioned in that emergency room example. The next slide, I'll just say a couple of things about infrastructure because I know the other speakers will talk about this. This is really important. The states and locals are the ones that build the things. We're always grateful for the federal government funds through the FAST Act and other ways in which that we receive money to build bridges and buildings and deal with airports and things like that. But the bottom line is the building's actually done at the state and local level. So I think that's critical from an infrastructure standpoint. Public-private partnerships are great, and a lot of states like Virginia, where I came from as an official, do a really good job utilizing them. But they're one of many tools in the toolbox, and they're not the only thing that can be done. And as Clarence mentioned, municipal bonds continue to be key. And the reason is they are an easy, relatively inexpensive way for states to get money over a long period of time to use that money for bridges, roads, transit, things they need. Muni bonds are still going to be a key source. Investors like them. There's a market for them. So they're still an important tool in the toolbox that we don't always talk a lot about because they're not sexy. We've been using them for years and years and years. But they're really an effective way for us at the state and local level to get enough money and raise money, again, to deal with the airports, the colleges, the bridges, the roads, the infrastructure needs we have in the U.S. And then the revenue sources, I think everyone knows this, really have to be contemplated. How do we want to go forward? The gas tax is a decreasing source of revenue because we've got all these vehicles on the road and they don't need as much gas. I know I have to tell you, I had an SUV. I drove to Richmond for Thanksgiving, and the one that I have now, it used about a quarter tank to get to Richmond. My old SUV took 3/4 of a tank. So I'm paying less gas tax. So revenue sources need to be thought about. And again, that tax exemption for muni bonds is key so that those are attractive to investors. And the next slide, just some comments that governors have been talking about with regard to states and the federal government. flexibility is key. They need to have at the state level, for example, in healthcare, they really need that flexibility, not to be told what to do, just what kind of results are wanted. For example, it's so much better to say, we want to see a decrease in infant mortality. But don't try to tell states how to get there. Arizona, think about how different Arizona is from Vermont. Arizona is an arid state. Its demographics are totally different. Vermont's a totally different state. Let each state decide how they want to approach things. Unfunded mandates, obviously always a problem. Anyone who's been on the Hill for even a year has probably heard us complain about those. Collaboration is key. I can't emphasize enough, even when folks disagree ideologically or they're different parties, it's so important to hear from the different levels of government, because I think they can inform and give a heads up to folks on the Hill as to how to approach doing different things. Again, just figure out what result you want, and states and locals can really discuss how to get there. And that's why I say results focused is important. And also to try to do no harm. I think one of the things, again, there are unintended consequences to a lot of things. States and locals can be part of the conversation to prevent that from happening. Why not find out what those unintended consequences will be early to try to deal with them or prevent them, rather than get headlines, in the paper or online about something that's really bad that can be prevented. So the next slide, this is what the people want. So Aaron, hit the next one. Yeah. People want results. That's all. That's what it really comes down to. And I think, again, we're really emphasizing states and locals want to help with that. And that's why we talk about things like the Muni Bonds, because the result is you've got a cracked bridge, you've got a falling down building in an airport, or whatever you have in infrastructure. We all want that dealt with. And so there are different ways to get there, but the bottom line is we want the results. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over now to Matt.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Come on, we're talking about taxes. This is fun stuff. Well, good morning. My name is Matt Chase. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Counties. We represent the 40,000 county elected officials across this country and the 3.6 million county employees that work for county governments across the country. Scott did a great job of setting the tone for what we're here to talk about. I want to drill down a little bit and really stress the importance of this issue. You've heard this buzzword or this phrase, tax-exempt municipal bonds, and you're scratching your head. What are we actually talking about? How many of you have flushed a toilet in the last 24 hours? How many of you went to a public school? How many have ever been to a hospital? Gone to an airport? Chances are those facilities were paid for and financed through tax-exempt municipal bonds. The scale that we're talking about this morning is $3.2 trillion in infrastructure. $3.2 trillion in infrastructure. And starting with the Simpson-Bowles Commission a couple years ago, this idea of changing over 100 years of history, actually dating back to the 1800s, codified in 1913, where governments don't tax each other, started to change. There was a debate, as the federal government needed money, of how could we alter, either repeal tax-exempt municipal bonds or cap some of the investors' returns as related to tax-exempt municipal bonds. So for us, this is a huge issue. As Scott mentioned, state and local governments not only build, but we have to finance and operate and maintain all of this infrastructure. The federal government is great partners in building, but very rarely will you pay for operations and maintenance. That's typically a state and local responsibility. So a couple of points. Again, we're talking about $3.2 trillion in existing outstanding debt that state and local governments have incurred. The number one use of tax-exempt municipal bonds, almost half, are K through 12 schools. A county or a city or a school district cannot finance through annual appropriations a $50 to $150 million school. I live in Arlington County. We just replaced 4 high schools. They average $85 to $100 million. You can't use your property tax revenue year in, year out to finance that alone. You need to go to the markets. The Simpson-Bowles Commission, when they talked about repealing or capping this, what we're talking about, if they repealed it, if the Congress repealed tax-exempt municipal bonds, it would increase our borrowing cost by over $500 billion for state and local government. That equates to the non-defense discretionary annual appropriations bills, if there was such a thing. But it's a huge amount of money. A cap would cost us $170 billion in increased interest. We don't get to build anymore. We don't get any more value. We would just have to pay more. And from a county perspective, when we say we mean property tax owners, because our primary source of revenue are property taxes. We get some sales tax in some states, but primarily counties live off of property tax. So when we talk about from a county lens, we're huge owners and operators of infrastructure. So if you think about transportation, county governments own 45% of the roads in this country, 40% of bridges, which is about 240,000 bridges. We own a third of transit systems, a third of hospitals, or a third of airports, and we own nearly 1,000 hospitals. And typically when a county owns a hospital, think of the old TV show ER, Cook County Hospital. Typically we are doing kind of emergency care, some of the indigent care, very expensive. The other thing is county jails and libraries. Jails in particular, we have over 2,900 county jails. We have about 11 million inmates a year. LA County, Los Angeles County, our largest county with 10 million people, to be the 8th largest state, same size as Ohio or Michigan, has 16,000 inmates in their jail every day. 16,000 inmates in their jail every day. They need to build a new facility. It's going to be $2.5 billion for a new jail. $2.5 billion for a new jail, because it has to include essentially a hospital within it to deal with the mental health problems, the substance abuse, and some of the issues that we're facing. That would basically take the whole HUD Community Development Block Grant, their annual appropriations, to build one jail. The only way we can do it is through tax-exempt municipal bonds. So when we talk about this, it's a serious issue for us, not only because of the financing and the needs at the local level, but there's a fundamental issue here with federalism, the relationship between federal, state, and local governments. It goes back to the 1800s. As I said, it was codified in 1913 with the first Internal Revenue Service Code. And basically, it's this issue of sovereign immunity, meaning governments aren't going to tax each other. State and locals don't tax federal property. Federal government shouldn't be taxing state and local governments. So sovereign tax immunity is really important to us. If the tax writers at the federal level change that relationship, it goes far beyond tax-exempt municipal bonds. It goes into a whole range of other issues, including public lands. So the ability of us to incur debt through tax-exempt municipal bonds, which is great for investors. Primarily, the investors use it for retirement savings, and about 3/4 of muni bonds are purchased by investors for retirement plans. So it's very important. But going back to this issue of the tax code, there have been court cases over the years that have made clear through the 10th Amendment that the federal government shouldn't be taxing the debt of state and local governments and shouldn't be making policy that impacts the ability of state and local governments to incur that debt. So there are some court cases over time that have really strengthened our argument that tax-exempt municipal bonds is not an earmark, it's not a special loophole, it's a key fundamental building block of the federalism system that we have in this country. So with that, we'll get down to the more specific level at the county level with Tim in Montgomery County. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. As Clarence said, I'm currently the Chief Administrative Officer for Montgomery County, Maryland, and my first question in the audience, since I'm close to home, is, are any of you Montgomery County residents? Uh-oh, I guess I have to be careful what I say here. Yeah. How are the services in Montgomery County? Okay? Good. Great to hear. As Chief Administrative Officer, I always say that, we're on the front lines. My job is to make sure that we have good service delivery. And so, I always say that my responsibility is people who live in Montgomery County put two things out at the curb in the morning, their kids and their trash. And at the end of the day, they only want one of them back. So if you're not from Montgomery County is northwest of here in Maryland. We have a population of over 1 million residents. We're home to a number of federal agencies, NIH, FDA, NIST, NOAA, to name a few. We also have a number of corporate headquarters in Montgomery County. We have Marriott, who recently was looking to possibly move to another place to move their headquarters, but with some hard work with the state and the county providing some incentives, we were able to keep Marriott in the county. Our budget in Montgomery County is actually larger than the budget of 5 states. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it does represent, what it costs to provide services to a county of 1 million residents. Before I go there, though, I'm also the past president of the Government Finance Officers Association. I just want to put a plug in for them. It's a member organization with nearly 19,000 members from all 50 states. They're professional financial type folks who are part of the organization, and I want to introduce Emily Swenson-Brock, who's the director of the Federal Liaison Center. Emily. And so you might see her from time to time up here lobbying on behalf of GFOA. We talked a little bit about municipal bonds, and you've heard about the importance of it. What I thought I would do is talk a little bit more about why municipal bonds are important in a place like Montgomery County. First of all, we are a full-service county. We provide primary and secondary education. We have a community college. We have fire, police services, libraries, health and human services, recreation, and we have a correctional facility. As I said, it's 1 million people. We have a $5 billion operating budget, a $4 billion capital budget, and we have $5 billion worth of debt outstanding. Montgomery County has the highest credit rating from 3 of the major credit rating agencies. We have a AAA rating, which I think is just a notch above the federal government right now. And we've had that rating for 43 consecutive years. But we still have huge infrastructure needs, even though we have $5 billion worth of debt outstanding. We have 159,000 students in our school system, 159,000. We're the largest school system in the state of Maryland. We're ranked 17th nationally. Each year we add 2,000 to 3,000 new students to the school system. 2,000 to 3,000 new students is the equivalent of a new high school each year. A new high school, as Matt said, costs somewhere between $100 and $150 million. So the question is, how do we pay for that? You got to pay for the debt service on the bonds. Basically, we have to do that through trying to continue to get the county to grow. Right now, we have master plans, 3 major master plans that were approved for the county, which have 50 million square feet of commercial and residential development available. When those master plans are fully built out, it creates about 100,000 new jobs. But once again, to unlock that kind of growth in the county, to get those jobs, we got to provide the infrastructure for the commercial and residential properties that would grow in those areas. As I said, when we look at our capital budget, our $4 billion capital budget, about 40% of that goes towards paying for K through 12 facilities, and so the majority of our money does go towards education, providing the additional facilities needed for those 2,000 to 3,000 new students each year. I guess the question is, if we don't have the ability to provide for those 2,000 to 3,000 new students, you got to figure out what to do with them. We'd end up, I guess, just cramming them in the schools that we currently have, and certainly that would diminish the value of our school system. Also, we use munis to build our transportation infrastructure, as I said, to help build out our master plans. Currently, we have in play, we're installing a bus rapid transit system in the county. We have 4 major corridors we're looking at. Planning is underway, but it's going to cost us about $2.3 billion to fully build out the bus rapid transit in those 4 corridors. We also use bond funding for our police and fire stations, libraries, recreation centers, our courthouse, public housing, environmental remediation projects, office buildings, parking garages, solid waste disposal facilities. We built a $400 million resource recovery facility in the early 90s as a way to take care of handling all of the trash that's generated within the county so that we didn't have to look outside the county for solutions. And I'm happy to say we've actually paid those bonds off so that the debt on that is free and clear. We also do tax-exempt lease financings to support the acquisition of things like fire and rescue apparatus. We have public safety radio system where we're doing a new public system modernization where you have to buy radios for police officers and firefighters and put in a computer-aided dispatch system. That costs $107 million to provide that in the county. Also, we use tax-exempt financing to buy buses, our transit buses. One clean diesel transit bus costs $500,000. And if you want to step up and be a little bit more environmentally friendly and get a hybrid, that costs $750,000 for one hybrid bus. IT equipment, if you drive through the county and this traffic signals most of the time are synchronized, although I always thought it'd be cool to have something in your car that when you hit that red light, you could push a button and it would turn green and you could keep going. We're not close to doing that, but our traffic signal modernization project costs $45 million to provide for what we have today. And again, none of that could be accomplished without access to the tax-exempt bond market. You heard from Matt some statistics about the value of the exemption. We calculated for Montgomery County that if the exemption didn't exist, we'd be paying about $40 million more each year to service the debt that we have outstanding. That's the equivalent of 536 school teachers or 266 police officers. So, there is value and something that we do clearly get through the exemption, the ability to provide those kinds of positions. And I would just close by saying we are concerned about some of the ideas we hear on the Hill here about ways to help us out. We're saying, municipal bonds have worked for 100 to 200 years. And so, we want to stress the importance of it's okay to look at other ideas and maybe diversify, but, let's stick with what's worked all these years to provide what we currently have. I did want to mention one other area where I have experience with using bonds. That's a new creative approach. I'm a board member at DC Water, which provides water and sewer services to the DC area. We just did a social impact bond, which is a new type of bond where we find an investor to, in this case, provide green infrastructure. It's a $20 million bond issue. And the way it works is if we actually can handle getting rid of wastewater better through green infrastructure, if it does a better job than we anticipate, the investor actually gets paid more. And on the other hand, if it doesn't work, they get paid less. So it's a way to raise capital to try something different, to try something new, where the investor gets a bonus for participating. And actually, that bond deal just was got an award from the bond buyer, which is a publication of the bond area, for a deal of the year for sort of an innovative approach. So there are things that we do with bonds to try to provide new ways of doing things.
Okay. Let's first thank the panel. They did a great job of teeing up You know, I'd like to always try to leave a challenge and a takeaway. First of all, I hope that you heard the terms partnership. We really are looking for federal partners and your members to join us and give us a seat at the table. So your questions are very interesting because what we'd like to have is those questions while you're developing the policy, and ask the question of the Big Seven: what impact is it going to have on your state, your state members, or what impact it's going to have on your local governments? And that's something that, as we look at the new administration and new Congress, we got to find ways to have those conversations while the process is occurring. Also, there is a municipal caucus that has been developed, and they really are looking at ways to equip local governments to be able to thrive and to create job and opportunities and to maintain our tax exemption on our municipal bonds. If your member has not joined that caucus, we really encourage you to learn about it and to get involved in that caucus, because it really is trying to explore some ways to give us that flexibility and to maintain ability to serve our members and residents. But if you don't take anything away from this, it's about the states, the local governments, and our need to have flexibility. Each city, county is different. Each state is different. There's no one industry that maintains every city and the county and state. So we do need to have that conversation because if you look at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, their members are large urban cities, and you look at the National League of Cities, we really are made up of small cities. Primarily, 75% of cities in America are under 50,000 population, and that's a big number that America represents in whole. So I hope that you found that this briefing was helpful. This is the first of a series. Matt Chase is going to be in charge of these for the future. I'm putting that out there so that he don't ask me to do anything more. But thank you all for joining us today, and please feel free to come up and ask any additional questions, and we look forward to working with you.